All right. Hello, Mike. Happy Friday.
Hello, Jack, and happy Friday and happy Groundhog's Day. By the way,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to let you
Mm-hmm.
pass because you are
Mm-hmm.
most famously in the spot where Groundhog's Day, the movie, was shot. And I'm
Yeah.
curious, do they have some sort of event there for all you people
Yeah.
that
Yeah. They do. Yeah.
they do?
They
Oh,
do.
okay.
Yeah.
Do they have a groundhog? Do they have Bill Murray and
Yeah. They have the actors. Kind of they are rotating the actors every year. So this year there was this actor that was playing the role of the insurance agent that was punched in the face all the time.
Ned Flander?
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
yeah. What's his name? I know
Yeah.
him. I think I actually
Forget.
know his name. But keep going.
Yeah. Yeah. So he was there this year. And last year, I think there was somebody else from the cast, or maybe just kind of like some
Oh,
weather persona.
sure.
Uh, oh, yeah, last year it was also interesting because the weatherman that was there kind of was a very famous person, in the Chicago scene. I think the Channel 9 or 12, kind of weather guy. So yeah, so there's always somebody famous.
That's awesome. Oh, cool. And so the whole town comes out, or at least do you have a little bit of a gathering as well, or do you think
Yeah,
it's
yeah, it's
mainly tourists that come for it? I don't even
yeah, well,
know.
it's a 6 a.m. gathering, so I think mostly locals come. Yeah,
That is a bit early. Is this just,
yeah,
I forget how this works. There's a animal and a shadow. I don't even know what the science
exactly,
is behind this. Okay.
exactly. Yeah, yeah, and
So if it's
apparently,
sunny, it's bad or is it good? I don't know.
well, I think the prognostication has a bad history, so I think flipping the coin is a better
Honestly,
prognostication.
you're right. You could just have a little cloud cover over your spot, and who
Yeah,
knows,
it's
right? Like
always cloudy. It's always cold.
it
On
also it started in Pennsylvania, so it depends on if it's cloudy in Pennsylvania. It sounds like total bullshit now that I think of it, but it was a good
yeah,
movie.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It is. It was a good movie, and the square is very nice place to be.
Good. Yeah.
So yeah,
I
yeah.
think there's a charm about these Illinois towns that we like Oak Park, and I saw a picture of
Yeah.
Oak Park circa, I don't know, 60s or something, and it's interesting how
Mhm.
many of the same brands are still in
Mhm.
existence, and of course how many aren't. So you had like a Woolworths, Five and Dime, which I remember, from antiquity, right? You also had on the
Mhm.
corner a Marshall Fields with the clock. Like I've never seen the clock,
Mm.
but the building itself I knew was Marshall Fields because a friend of mine actually owns that building. And long story short, but whatever. Um, yeah, it was just interesting because you know how that change doesn't happen. It had a lot of signs, right? A lot of big neon signs, which I guess is
Mhm.
not quite as fashionable nowadays or more expensive or something. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Neons, yeah, were kind of like kind of in fashion, for decades, and now they are out. Right now, it just has to be a LCD screen,
Yeah.
maybe kind of like Las Vegas style kind of stuff.
Yeah, even at the theater. So I went to the theater to watch a movie called The Brutalist. I don't know. I just thought it'd be interesting. But now the theaters are filled with recliners, heated, like, put your feet up recliners like this
Oh,
for watching the movie. And still, even then, I found it to be like, it's trying too hard. That's what I kept thinking. Like, I mean, the point of a movie theater is sometimes just to be with other people, which still seems the hardest part. Like, it's hard to
mm,
get people out to the cinema, but the more like relaxed, I guess you are, and the more it is like home, the more I would just kind of rather be home.
yeah.
For whatever reason, it's louder though. We asked them to turn it down, which, that's how old I am. I'm
Yeah,
like,
I bring earplugs. I'm not kidding. I bring my own earplugs to the movies because yeah, I can't take it.
ah, interesting. Yeah, because I would think that with all this technology, you would have a better sound system, but actually, it just always sounds shrill and again, just too bombastic. I don't know. It doesn't sound, inviting, right? I get it. They're trying to
Yeah,
be shock and awe or something or whatever. But yeah,
yeah.
it was,
Well, maybe the sound systems are better, right? Maybe you can feel the low frequencies, so definitely they are maybe in 20 hertz, kind of range, really, really loud. But everything else is, too uncomfortable to my ears, I would say.
I think you're on to something because in the day I used to work at a movie theater when I was a kid, and one of the movies that we had come through was called Earthquake, and the
Oh,
scam
the
behind this
Charlton
movie,
Heston movie?
Charlton Heston,
Charlton.
exactly.
Oh,
So the
yeah.
scam behind the movie was the theaters were installed these huge
Mm,
subwoofers, right? So
uh,
that when the earthquake came, you had this like visceral
mm.
impact, right? Of course, then they shipped it off, and I don't know. These were all these little scams that they kept trying to think would revolutionize things, but I don't remember there being actually a ton of like low impact. It seemed very just loud and shrill to me, which is a shame because yeah, I think it's because it's more expensive. Bass
Mm,
always costs more money for some weird reason. Um,
yeah.
it's when I went to the IMAX theater and saw Oppenheimer, I was actually pretty impressed because it did have that low impact,
Mm, mm,
which actually to me was sort of a character in the movie. Weirdly enough, the sound of it was kind
mm,
of an important part. So yeah, there's that. But we're,
mm.
AI, man, movies, AI.
Yeah.
Um, we've got a couple of topics. I think one, deep seek isn't going away. I was just using it a couple of seconds ago because there's just something charming about the tone of the reasoning model. I don't know who helped build that prompt, but it just sounded to me much like a dude. I don't know why. It just has this very dude energy about this. Have
Mm.
you experienced this or am I unique in this? I'm not sure.
Well, to tell you the truth, the way I use LLMs was
Hmm.
to kind of check my code or do some data transformations. So I'm really not talking too much in. I mean, I'm formulating the questions, in English, but what I'm expecting to get back was usually either a data structure or a snippet of a code. So yeah, I don't, recently I wasn't kind of getting a lot of personality, from
Hmm.
large language models. But in terms of, the power, the usefulness, that kind of thing, I still kind of on the fence a little bit because there's still this kind of complexity limit where up until the certain threshold, the model is going to perform very well. But if you overload it with context, then it's going to kind of lose its place. So still, even the latest greatest, still similar thing. And sometimes even for a small snippet of a code, and that kind of is maybe a little bit surprising. So let's say you have a data structure that you want analyzed, right? And that
Hmm.
data structure is, let's say, enclosed in let's say three curly braces, and then there's something inside, like a JSON kind of structure,
Sure.
right? So those three curly braces are kind of well formed, so it means that they are open and closed. So logically speaking, the model shouldn't have any problems with it because it's kind of like three parentheses open and closed. That's and like a kid can understand that. But apparently, the large language models have issues with that. Like if I manually
Hmm.
strip those parentheses, the model performs beautifully. But if I keep them in there, and the data structure is really really small, maybe like 5 lines, of simple text, it's kind of like breaking down, like, oh, like, hey, this is not a well-formed data structure. We're going to have to write some special code that is kind of first going around the malformatedness, or whatever you want to call it.
Sure.
So yeah, so that's kind of surprising. Like you have the great models that took, like, gazillions of processor time to train. Still sometimes you have a hook that if you find that hook that is kind of preventing the model from moving forward, then it kind of changes a lot.
Wow. No, I mean, that's really interesting. One aside is just on your next try, I don't know if you can, but just
Mm,
look at, even for whatever question, just look at the reasoning model. It's
mm,
at least in my IDE or whatever. It's just a little thing you can open up and watch it and let it talk. It just sort of talks through how it solves the problem before it solves the problem. And what's interesting to me is that that is to me sort of a preface of trust, right? Like if it just gave you the answer, right? The answer is always 42 or whatever, you're kind of then just gonna, like you said, you're gonna compare it with other models, which I do all the time, right? You say, hey, you told me this and you told me that, and that's fine. That's, I guess, probably our human way of managing information, right? We're looking for social proof. We're looking for knowledge, right? The truth is going to be some sort of social proof, right? I've heard this before, so it's probably true. Or it seems, it has that truth to it. But to be quite honest, all these models are going to come up with something reasonable, right? It's always going to be, at least at the information level. Yeah, it used to be lower. And I'm speaking in terms of my own pyramid way of looking at things, right? Like you go up a little bit and then you can say, there's something actionable is probably above knowledge, right? Like, hey, yeah, I gotta buy that or do that. Anyway, long story short, its tone is really interesting in terms of engendering this kind of trust. So try it. That's all. I mean, just see if it does do anything to you emotionally, right? Rather than empirically, which can be also wrong, right? Like, either way is one way, but I do like it for that because normally it's fairly well reasoned. It also breaks down things into parts, which is good in just learning how its logic works. But back to the curly braces. So I don't know if you've experienced this, but one puzzle I have is I think that the language of code will change because the human things that we've created, right? Like brackets are a really good one. Is like, here's how I just tell the computer to start and stop or to group or taxonomy, right? We need all these hierarchies. I don't think these models need these hierarchies to perform. Like you said, they kind of can posit it through training, that this is how it's going to work. But you can contradict me because I might have just made that up.
Yeah. I am observing the same thing. So what is the best tool right now that kind of like what's the best data structure that I can use or submit to the large language model so that I get the best kind of answer, right? So what is that, right? That thing is actually a combination of a human instruction, maybe a sentence or a paragraph, right? And then a relevant piece of code. Now, if those two things kind of like coexist, and you ask the model a very complicated question, then your rate of success is very high if you have those two things in context. So, for example, when I am decomposing a problem that needs to be solved, I'm decomposing it by creating small chunks of programs, something that you would do anyway, just maybe those external procedures or functions or classes of code that are kind of like solving a problem in a baby step fashion, right? So that is a fantastic context for problem solving, right? So if you want custom SQL embedded in Java, right? Or if you want to have some sort of a SQL statement that talks to a very particular flavor of a database that is using SQL, but half of the SQL doesn't work, it has to be reworked, right? If you have that kind of thing attached as context to your question, then you will get beautiful results, even from not really top of the line models. So yeah, there's something to it, right? Like the code is, code gonna get generated, is gonna get executed, right? But code also kind of becomes part of the question.
Well, I guess what I'm trying to say, and maybe it's ties it together, right? Is code is human. Like we invented code to talk
Yeah.
to these weird gates, right? These millions of bizarre little and or gates, that kind of are what computers are. And in our last discussion and what I posted was that kind of, that DNA like question, right? Is there, are we just learning kind of in a sense, how did we get made? Because at the lowest level, it's somewhat understood, although it's still miraculous, right? That we were able to make these things. But then we had to come up with these ways of, right, of how to handle these things, which may or may not be needed anymore. That's what I'm getting at. Like, if
Mm.
it can make all the subroutines from my query, right? Like you're watching its reasoning and said, well, I'm going to need like all these different things to understand this data, but I'll need something like, is it numeric? Is it, I don't know. It'll have to go through a lot of like building. But then, the point of that is you can maybe catch it when it forgets something, right? Oh, but I've seen more and more of this where I think that people are saying that coding is kind of going to evolve, right? It's going to have to turn into something else, and it's not this same, because I hate curly bracket. I don't hate them, but you see what I mean? Like even SAS, I don't know if you know CSS, which is kind of my favorite language, right? But
Mm. Mm.
all of the formalities are there just to make it readable by humans, right? All these formalities and such are really just to kind of make sure that you don't have parsing errors. But when your machine is as flexible as these new entities are, right? You don't
Mm.
need, you're like you're saying, those things actually are probably misunderstood, more likely. Like I don't think even if you asked it, would it understand a missing bracket? But you'd get that instantly in an IDE, right? You
Mm.
forgot to close, you forgot to close some clause, which is always
Mm.
like, oh crap, like I'm supposed to indent it, I'm supposed to look at this and figure out where I forgot to do something. But that's a human, right? It's humans just bending ourself to computers. I don't know, as usual. So,
Yeah, yeah.
so it's an interesting stretch because, as far as I know, a lot of these models were probably trained on GitHub. I mean, or something, right? I mean, here's a ton of code,
Mm. Yeah,
as
yeah,
much, and I
exactly.
mean,
Yeah.
GitHub itself trained its own AI. I don't know whatever became of that, but whatever, right?
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, I agree. I mean, a kind of an interesting maybe evolution of everything would be so now since we can generate pretty much whatever we want, maybe we can think a little bit about maybe efficiency of code, right? I mean, Python, which seems to be the predominant tool nowadays, is probably not the best language to use if you want to utilize your resources efficiently. I mean,
Hmm.
uh, yeah,
Too
yeah,
high level? Is it just too
yeah,
high
it's
level?
well, there is other languages that execute faster, which means probably that you are losing, less kind of energy, in the process, and perhaps, perhaps since you generate the code anyway, and it's doable to do that, maybe we should be generating, I don't know, assembly language, right? Maybe something that is really, really efficient. Since you are generating with AI, you are testing with AI, right? There is really kind of less and less time we spend looking at the code. Maybe yeah, maybe we can start generating those black boxes pretty much because nobody, debugging assembly or machine code is really kind of really not something that anybody wants to do. So
Hmm.
yeah, so if we are
No,
yeah, so
right. That's
but if we are saving energy, right? If we are making everything more efficient, then perhaps this is the way to do it, right? So to your point, right? Yeah, who needs to look at the code that gets generated? We just have to make sure that it's correct and it's safe. But everything else, is pretty much moot point, right?
Yeah. Oh, well, and by the way, fabulous segue into your topic for this week. So you sent
Mm.
me what to me looked like a prompt
Mm.
that somebody's
Yeah.
like, "Hey, you want to understand everything about X? Here's a prompt to do it." And when you clicked on it, it created, I guess, like a novella
Mm.
about role-playing games. Okay.
Mm.
So, and I think this was based on maybe some new models around research, because I noticed some new
Mm.
little tidbits, and their design departments are actually pretty good because they have to invent little ways to say like, oh, I didn't just make up this. So it's got some weird little footnotey things that happening. And I
Mm.
read through it and it was interesting. And I thought, wow, what a, is that the future of PhDs, that I just give you my query? And certainly it's a future for me and
Mm.
as a writer, since I tend to just set up the idea and I try to get AI to fill in, sort of the narrative blanks, right? That
Mm.
that I find harder than just sort of crafting it's kind of like driving a car, right? I just want to be in the driver's seat. Don't really do the work of getting me from here to there. And, this is the machine. This machine does it for me, right? So I like this machine doing this kind of writing or helping me with writing. And just because then I can keep my mind on the point, much as if you were just trying to figure out where that curly brace is, right? That's the annoying part of
Mm.
telling computers what to do, right? Is that you just didn't form it properly.
Mhm.
Uh, anyway, but back to here, I got this novel, but is the novel, well, what do you think? Am I misreading this, or did that step out to you as being interesting?
Well, yeah. So, yeah, to me, interactive fiction, right, is kind of like and AI is really
Hmm.
kind of like a closely related fields, and I love reading about, yeah, I love reading sci-fi too, So William Gibson comes to mind, like his novel Peripheral, for example, or Neuromancer, that kind of feels like, hey, so here's this that fictional world, right? And
Hmm.
you kind of, and he is exploring it one way, but what if uh, you could have an AI system that is going to create a variety on that story, right? Like, like in Peripheral, the story actually spans, it's in this all in the cyber world, and it actually spans different time realities, right? So there is so it's kind of like there is this kind of quantum connection, maybe, or something like that, right? So yeah, so you can have rooms that are kind of separated by space, you can have rooms that are separated by time. So if you look at if you look at the possibilities that are there, right? Kind of like, hey, so what can I do there, right? Like what is the next step? Or if I have some sort of a problem that needs to be solved in that artificial world, how do I go about it, right? And
Hmm.
board games or kind of interactive kind of like whatever Dungeon and Dragon kind of style games are kind of a test bed, for a lot of AI kind of thinking. And actually, I have a little bit of a diagram that maybe I can share for a moment, so that let's see, maybe if I can kind of do this. All right, can I?
Oh,
Yeah, can you see my screen?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Very nice.
So
Okay.
this is kind of like the ultimate kind of like toy problem, for problem solving, right? And this can be transformed into interactive fiction, or solving a problem in a real life. But essentially, if you can handle this, right? So let's say you have an initial state of a puzzle, right? Like the blocks are stacked A, B, C, and
Hmm.
then your goal state might be something like that. You just restack them into an uh, arbitrary configuration. Now, how do you do that, right? Like, what is the process that can kind of solve this particular problem? And the funny thing is that this process, if you have the algorithm that can do this, then it's transferable to a lot of other areas, including natural language formulated problems, not just those things that we are looking at, like, hey, there's just a table and three possible things that you can move around, right? And then
Hmm.
if you start kind of diving into this, well, then problem decomposition is something that you really need, right? Because maybe here, that state here is something that you absolutely need to be able to algorithmically generate, right? Like if the block A is supposed to go from the top position to the bottom position on the table, then you have to be able to reach that intermediate state, right? Like where just imagine a robotic arm picking block A and putting it on the table, because this is absolutely the first step that you have to make. And this is an easy step because this is nothing else you can do, right? Because that block A is on top, and maybe you know maybe the algorithmic approach is not allowing you to do anything else, maybe not blowing up the blogs or trashing them or whatever, right? So if
Sure.
so you define the world, right? You define you define the moves, you define the limitations and constraints. So if you kind of start looking at this, now we have systems that actually can do this, right? Because you can have something that can be kind of this generative planner system, and this is kind of like a block world, or a kind of like a diagram of a solution that that used to be really difficult without those little LLMs kind of in the
Hmm.
loop. So that is there, and so there's always kind of these little things that will be needed, right? So in you will have to be able to see the initial state, right? So you will able to get some information about the world, right? And again, this could be just something that you write up, right? Or maybe again, in the corporate world, this could be the emails, or it could be the the documentation that exists, right? Then you need to be able to kind of see the goal state that you would like to achieve, and perhaps you don't know exactly what that goal
Hmm.
state. It can be a little bit fuzzy, right? So then in the middle you need to have a plan that kind of reduces the initial state to something that resembles the goal state. And so that planning process is requiring something that is basically a data structure that sometimes is called an action in AI world, or in the AI planning kind of research. And that means that in order to execute something, you have to be able to fulfill the preconditions, right? Like maybe in this block world here, I'm not able to move block C because block C is covered by other blocks. So this could be
Hmm.
my precondition, right? Like nothing can be on top of a block because otherwise I cannot move it,
Hmm.
right? So that's that. So if the preconditions are fulfilled, then actions can be executed, and then if I move block A, right, or if I kind of like put something on a table, then I have to be able to exactly very well represent that situation, because that outcome becomes a precondition to the next step.
Hmm.
So I guess what I'm trying to say is that it was all very difficult to do, right? Like it was very difficult to describe the initial state. It was very difficult to kind of get the preconditions right, or what the outcomes are. But now you have those language reasoning machines that can actually describe everything, right? I mean, it's now all these steps can be kind of accomplished almost in an automatic way, and it could translate into interactive fiction scenarios where,
Hmm.
hey, I have a room and I walk into a room, and what do I need to do there, right? Maybe there's going to be some problems for me to solve. Or in the business world, or in data analytics, this diagram kind of apply to a lot of things. And then maybe another funny thing is that now we have this reflection capability, because uh, at any stage of the process, you can actually ask the large language model, hey, is that really correct what we are doing?
Hmm.
Is there perhaps another way to do it, or maybe there's some sort of an obvious problem? And it could be another large language model that you can use, right? So that you
Hmm.
have this panel of judges that kind of is reflecting and evaluating steps, and maybe kind of optimizing any of those things. So yeah, this diagram is very large, but I just thought that this interactive fiction paper that I sent you was kind of like kind of really relevant to this.
Oh, absolutely. And this sparks quite a few things. So I'm gonna just see if you can help me, because some of this, the fun thing of the engineer mind versus the whatever mind I have, is this hierarchy, right? Like there's
Hmm.
problems, if they're broken down enough, can be determined as solvable or unsolvable. And to my creative mind, I'm like, well, that's a really interesting idea, right? Like most of the things we encounter, we don't think of their solvability, right? In human terms, we we operate under a lot of uncertainty. Does that make
Hmm.
sense? Right?
Yeah.
And we're
Hmm.
designed to actually ignore everything and be very biased for this reason, that we can not know everything and somehow still function. It's kind of wild. It also can turn out to be bad when people act badly, right? Um, but serendipity happens sometimes, and people get lucky, right? And their lack of ability turns out to be something really interesting. But solvability is, I think, one of the. Am I getting that right, or am I just completely missing the point?
Yeah, exactly right. I mean, there is a very funny story actually in the block world that maybe contributed to the AI winter, so-called winter in the 80s
Hmm.
and maybe even 90s. By winter we mean that the enthusiastic period of AI kind of ended for after maybe initial decades of progress, because people actually realized that, hey, there's actually a configuration of those blocks that cannot be solved by deterministic methods.
Mm.
So even in
Okay.
this super trivial problem, you can formulate it so that restacking those blocks from ABC to a specific configuration is actually not doable
Okay. So your
unless
Gödel
unless
theorem,
you
right?
as
The
unless you overturn the table, right? Which is not in the list of actions that you might have. So this is
Oh,
the
okay.
very well-known Sussman anomaly in AI planning research. Sussman anomaly. Anybody can look it up. So yeah. But now yeah, you're exactly right. Except that now the LLMs have the capability to turn over the table and maybe blow up the
Yeah.
problem
Oh,
so that
that's what I
yeah
mean is that's what they're interesting because of these non-intuitive actions that aren't hierarchical, right? Turning
mm,
over the table, I guess, is the perfect non engineered possibility, but it works. That's
yeah
the serendipity, right? It just so
mm,
happened that you got the right answer.
mm,
Interesting, because also I don't know why I was fascinated by reading into a solution for a sorting algorithm, which apparently is the most popular thing you ask people about develop sorting algorithms.
mm,
And after a while into this and going into enormous depth, the person kind of like ended up saying, "Well, then you just you just put sort on it." Or
mm,
something like that. And I was like, well, I thought you had to figure out how does sorting work, right? Like someone already figured out this sort algorithm. Does that make sense, right? Like whatever
mm.
that subroutine is of sort. And I thought, well, now I'm kind of cheated out of my because I went to such depth because I thought that was it's a hard problem to solve of like how the sorting algorithm works. And as I guess we all know, there's lots of them, right? And they all have different characteristics. Like you said, I think what do people look for? Efficiencies, right? Like because I guess you're always sorting stuff. I don't know anything about computers, but I'm assuming just knowing a little about memory, you're probably
Mm.
always having to do a lot of this.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, so here sorting plays a role, obviously, because you may have more than one action that is
Hmm.
available, right? So the sorting process needs to be intelligent, right? Pick the best one that is not only a short-sighted action, right?
Hmm.
That kind of may kind of lead you to some sort of a requirement of going back, backtracking. So this is the sorting and is a kind of a form of pathfinding here, right? Like
Hmm.
reaching the
Oh,
the
right.
goal state.
Yeah.
So I think you're right, and and yeah, I mean, this again, this is kind of one of the most classical, certainly in top three
Yeah.
most classical toy problems in artificial intelligence, right? But this diagram that we are looking at has changed, comparing to, let's say, what you see in literature from the era before large language models, and I think this is kind of remarkable, right? And yeah, so again, the perhaps our audience will kind of not see this interactive fiction kind of as a useful vehicle, because a lot of people maybe don't not play you know role playing games, maybe don't are not familiar with that, or maybe maybe simply kind of are, maybe oriented towards kind of like machine learning side of AI, more.
Hmm.
But but the fact here that we are, to your point, we are able to search the plan, so that we are reaching the goal state, right? And the ability also that we are able to search the actions, that kind of meet the preconditions the best, right? And that we are able to reflect on the outcomes, where we are executing the plans, and we can, at any stage, we can ask the AI to kind of evaluate, hey, are we on the right track? This is kind
Hmm.
of like a truly remarkable changes to how
Truly.
we
Oh
can
no,
use computer science.
well, this is where, if you want to, and thank you for sharing this, but I miss seeing you. So hold on, if you don't mind, how do you bring us
Mm,
back?
mm.
Um, let's talk games, because I haven't gotten to this part of my narrative.
Lost audio, Mike. I'm not sure how do we want to handle this. I lost audio. I can't hear you. I can't hear you, Mike.
I'm
Yeah.
changing my
Oh,
microphone.
yeah.
Anything?
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Well,
We are back.
so much for my fancy microphone. I'll just put it back. Sorry about that.
Yeah. I
Um,
think I think the mic was also a little bit less quality than previous.
as I
It
said,
was kind of
you
staticky
experiment,
a little.
you win and you lose sometimes, and I apologize. I guess I was just trying something new. I think I can summarize my point into the games I like playing are crafted to be winnable, right? Just like solvable, right? They're
Mm,
winnable. They have end goals, and when you're through with them, you congratulate yourself on the experience of getting to the end. Role playing games, which I think are where we're both headed here, are more experiential, right? They're really about engaging you with having an experience. You're there to experience something. And the first thing I ever did when ChatGPT came out was had it generate a text adventure, right? So I had it,
mm,
come up with this. And what was interesting is that it did a fairly decent job of trying to engage me in whatever this was, yet I could tell that it wasn't winnable. You know what I mean? Like I knew that it could just keep going and probably never really thought too much about rewards and some of the other extrinsic things that you probably need in a
mm.
game, right? Like competition or something like that. Of course, much time has passed, and I think my observation of seeing kids playing games, which is not new, right? That's all kids really want to do with their time. It made me think, well, yeah, if these were, I hate to say the word educational, but why not? We had what was that thing? The wagon through the prairie game. You know, I think that was fairly famous back in the day. What was that called? Oregon Trail, right? Like somehow you would learn something about the world by playing this experience. However, these things were very linear, right? There was probably only a few, like you said, there wasn't any LLMs to make it more variable. But okay, so now if I've made any point and you can hear me, it's winnable versus not winnable. Like what
Mm.
is more motivational for a participant, right? If you are
Yeah.
there, like what do you think? Because I know you play a
Well,
lot of non-winnable games, right? And we
yeah.
can make fun of Elon playing apparently non-winnable games that you have to hire people to play for you. Because in order to win, you know that's the idea, right? The game
Well,
itself
yeah.
is secondary. But keep going. I don't know. I like to
Well,
make
yeah, I
fun
mean
of
the
Musk.
the fundamental rule of video game design is for the video game to lose after a good fight, right?
Okay.
So
Yeah.
so that's obviously maybe a little bit of a different paradigm from, let's say, maybe those massively multiplayer games where the objective is to kind of have like a kind of social interaction between players, and that no longer kind of applies because whatever people do is whatever they do. But in terms of the game being the opponent, right? The game is supposed to lose after a good fight, and that's
Hmm.
why there is obviously levels, and at the beginning, if you are not skilled, then the game is going to be very easy to beat. And but in games that we are talking about, where it's a kind of maybe a magic style game or some sort of a kind of again interactive fiction, that's a much more nuanced problem, right? How do you actually kind of build it? And it's not just about kind of fragging, right, or losing lives, right? It's more about what the experience can be, and the experience can be defined in a million different things. But I think it's definable through a natural language kind of form. So I think there is this I know we are running out of time, but there was this novel that I read a long time ago, and I think the title was something similar to The Hired Man, and
Hmm.
it goes like that, right? There is like an interstellar mission far in the future, and in the spaceship there is a murder. The crew discovers that the the captain of the starship got killed at night, with a ancient Magnum 44 bullet, right? Which at that time was almost unheard of, because it's so much in the future, right? And they
Hmm.
are beginning to kind of trying to discover what happened, right? And they kind of got into his kind of personal effects, and they find a game. The name of the game is Hired Man, and apparently it's a highly AI game where you can basically kind of your job is to evade, hitmen, and and they are beginning to kind of unpack this a little bit, and the AI of the game is still on the computers of
Ah,
the
okay.
starship, and it basically is about, hey, the game is going to find somebody who is willing to kill you, right? And it's going to kind of cover its tracks. All the log files within the starship were expertly, kind of redacted, right? So nobody from the crew, is actually. Yeah, I mean, everybody on the crew is under suspicion, but they can't find anything because all the logs, all the movements have been redacted by the AI. So you
Ah,
can see you can
okay.
see where the games of the future with robust AI can go, right? I mean, I'm not talking about necessarily kind of having in real life, gangs, being hired by sentient AIs, but that's a different paradigm, right? Like you can have a much deeper interaction with an AI that at the very least can take over your PC. I think that's a given, right? Because the co-pilots are already doing that on Windows 11, right? And there is open talk about the AI controlling the operating system. So you can see
Hmm.
where this can go if we have some sort of a maybe a little bit more quote unquote entertainment oriented co-pilots, right?
Well, and maybe that's the kind of puzzle right now is that I want to give full props to like Khan Academy or something. Whereas if you wanted to learn whatever, I'm assuming that some of their tools, along with AI's help, can help anyone. And this is my point, right? Is education can't just favor the motivated. If you're not motivated, it's very challenging to get you into the state of mind where you're going to tackle and get anything out of my class or anything, right? Like I have to help set up some rewarding system. Sometimes it's grades, right? But those are still pretty weak. That if you're engaged or you're not engaged, how can we help use these tools to help more people get more engaged in more of these, I'd say, more meta subjects, right? It's not necessarily about just learning statistics, which I always think is a really good model, right? It's a very interesting kind of math. That's all, and tends not to be taught until you get into very specialized situations. But it's pretty useful and it's pretty interesting. And if there was a game that could help you engage with these topics, you just might learn something. And I know it's more my realm, but I think I might have told you I've kind of built at least trying to build a concept of a curriculum around using a game to teach the rules of perception, because I'm a huge fan of this game, The Witness. And The Witness is really just about how do you perceive things. That's literally what the game is about, and does a massively good job if you give enough time, which is a lot of time, a semester's worth of time. You could potentially learn something through activity that you would never be able to learn through books or museum visits, right? Because you're technically in the situation where you have to understand these rules. And there's also a ton of logic involved, right? Like how do things work? So it's a fascinating educational game, I guess, if you call it that, but it's also finite and it is winnable because the winning is sort of the epiphany of why is this here? Because it's very obviously a game when you're in it. So you kind of have to unravel the mystery of why is this game here?
And maybe that's a huge idea. I mean,
I don't know. I would think,
the
could you not
gaming
have a book?
industry.
Could you have a game as your curriculum, right?
Exactly. I mean, the gaming industry went into the innovation mode in combat scenarios, strategic kind
True,
of
right.
behavior, that is always oriented towards some sort of a conflict, always. And I'm not belittling it. I mean, there was a lot of rocket science that went into this, but perhaps your idea is kind of like, hey, where AI and gaming could actually go to actually benefit a lot more. The whole kind of population of people who are interested in playing games, right? And if we could kind of find a hook, right, that is kind of this educational, creates that educational excitement, similar to the excitement of being part of the first person shooter, scenario, that would be a huge thing. And maybe we can spend some more time, in future discussions on kind of like designing this thing, because I would love to be part of that design as well.
I will say a low-hanging fruit, just as you said, we are out of time, but last week I had to do my sensitivity training or whatever it's called for Northwestern. And I just thought the people who built this model, right, this model for how you educate people, was extremely well done, right? Really expensive. All the kudos I give to this team. However, I learned absolutely nothing, right? Like it was really just this torture of getting through it because it kind of, again, it didn't have any of this element like we're talking about. Like you have to be able to fail, right? And failing isn't getting the answer wrong. Failing is kind of what they're trying to show you, but doing it is much more interesting. And I kept thinking like, well, if this was just something you played this game every week, how to be a manager, and you just kind of could do anything you wanted, and we'd have the sort of basic guidelines within it. we wouldn't necessarily have to just dump information on people, right? Because that's the real problem. I don't know how many PDFs I had to open and how many
Mm.
long paragraphs I had to skip to get to the question it was asking, which was usually a multiple choice, and the one that sounded less horrible was usually the answer, right? So you didn't have to, well, I gamed it, right? I gamed the game. And now that I'm authorized, I never have to go there again. But I'm like, no, you really should play the game of management, fake manager, every week. And it seems actually really would be very beneficial because we know this kind of activity-based learning is much more impactful, right? You've
Mm.
you've done it, and therefore you can continue to do it. Whereas I heard it doesn't have the same, it doesn't have the same impact, right? Having these interactive stories around these challenges, like not legislative, but government challenges. I can't think of anything more
Mm.
confusing than, hey, am I breaking the law? Right? You
Yeah.
must think about this a lot, right? Like, is somebody going to, summarize what I'm doing and say, this is against, X, Y, and Z? Because we are literally trying to change
Mm.
some dynamics, and that's going to displace different skill sets.
Mm.
Ouch, right? But if we are all trainable, or if we are all willing, and if it's fun, I can just think, like, if it's fun, it changes the dynamic completely, right? How many people do you see at work sitting there playing solitaire? I mean, it's
Mm.
kind of a trope because, like, yeah, you want to engage yourself somehow. Why not engage yourself in this journey? Although, again, we're very utopic sometimes, Jack, you and I
Yeah.
hope you know, but it still seems like a great topic. I'm glad
Yeah.
you're encouraging. Thank you for that.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Yeah.
Once again, a great time. I can't wait to write this one up. So
All
happy
right.
continuing February doldrums around here, but it's always a warm, exciting time to hear what you're up to. And thank you for sharing your idea. I love the diagram guy. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Mike. Yeah. It was really interesting today.
Cool.
The topics resonated. So yeah. Until next time.
Till next time. Cheers. End scene. Fun. Yeah, I don't